Welcome to Breaking News with Ben Hunt, Jack Forehand, and Matt Ziegler. Before we start, let me remind you what the show is not. Breaking News is not a show about fact-checking. Breaking News is not a show about saying whose bias is the one and only correct bias. And Breaking News is definitely not a show about calling out fake news. Breaking News is a show where we look at today's top stories and have a conversation around our favorite critical question, why am I reading this now? Drawing on the headlines we're tracking at fiatnews.com, join us as we talk about what's collectively making us tick, with clear eyes, full hearts, and this obligatory disclaimer. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and someone who knows your unique situation. We are not that person.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Breaking News. Reminder, if you're not already subscribed to the show on YouTube, come on over, click that button. I'm Matt Ziegler, joined as always by Ben Hunt. Say hello, Ben.
Hello, Ben.
And Jack Forehand. Say hello, Jack.
Hello, Jack.
So we've got all sorts of fun today. We've got a tweet of the week, and it's extra zeitgeisty because we're talking about the million flavors of inflation and how you too can position an inflation statistic to prove any point you'd like to make at this point. Jack, you've got a dumb question about if fundamentals will ever matter to anyone ever again. Ever, forever. I have a cultish corner channeling the spiritual wisdom of one Mitch Hedberg via his quit trying to act like I'm a steamboat operator bit, and I promise it will make sense. We've got summary notes at the end, but first, before the big story, we got a really cool email, like a really, really cool email here. Ben, protecting the innocent people involved, tell us about the message of this email we got at Breaking News.
It was a great email, and it was in relation to, was it the last Breaking News we did, or was it 2 ago, where it was Jack's dumb question? It was about Elon's pay package that had been overturned by the Delaware Chancery Court. I forget. Anyway, it was an episode or 2 ago. We got an email from one of the sitting judges on the Delaware Chancery Court. Not the judge from that particular decision, but a judge on the Chancery Court, there are only a few, just thanking us for the job we did in explaining the issues and the thinking that went behind the decision. So yeah, really cool. Really, really cool to hear that from somebody who was truly in the room, to use the Hamilton expression. So that definitely made our day. So keep those chords and letters coming.
That's one of the things I've learned doing podcasting over the years is like, you never know who's out there listening. Like, I'm always shocked that somebody will reach out to me and I'm like, I can't believe that person was actually listening to what we're doing. Like that's one of the coolest parts I think about doing these things.
Absolutely right, Jack. That is the coolest part of all of this is, yeah, you don't know who's out there listening, and it's always a lot of interesting people who are.
Especially when it stretches beyond people saying, batshit crazy things and actually appreciating nuance. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing.
Well, let's dive right into the crazy then, because we've got a big story this week. Now, I think it was Danny Rojas who told Ted Lasso that football is life, but in some dark days lately, I feel like there's a fresh class of raccoons that I'm noticing who are quietly displaying that grifting is life attitude all over the place.
Grifting is life.
We're going to talk high-level raccoons, I think, kind of like the Michael Saylors and some of the other situations, the Benioffs. We're going to talk low-level raccoons like people sapping wealth from got-rich-slow midlifers, and we might even have some financial media, social financial media experts here along the way. But Ben, start with us here. There's a wonderful Epsilon theory post. It was too clever by half, I want to say, but you're going to correct me.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the term raccoon and why we use this metaphor.
Well, this was back in my farm and born animal phase of writing Epsilon theory. And it ended up, actually, I think it's probably the most popular Epsilon theory note ever. And the title comes from this Brit expression, too clever by half, because that's what describes so many people in our business of investing in markets. We're too clever by half. I fully put myself in that description. Not bad guys at all or gals at all, but we're just too clever for our own good. And the animal I compared that to, and yes, this was a conversation about Bitcoin, and mortgage-backed securities and all this stuff. But the animal I compared it to were the coyotes who live in the woods outside of our farm, because they're very smart, very clever animals, but they're too clever by half. They're too clever for their own good. They get shot, they get killed because they don't understand the larger game that's being played here. Animal control comes in and puts them down. So that was the animal for that part of the story. And then I was saying, but there's another animal that never gets put down by animal control that's just a thief, right? A thief. And that's the raccoon. I hate raccoons. Raccoons are just murdering, thieving varmints, but because they've got, essentially opposable thumbs and, a cute little mask, they have much better PR than the coyote. And in my kind of barnyard lexicon, that's how I describe the grifters, the con men, the shysters that pervade our business of investing. And they particularly pervade areas of investing where coyotes, who are smart and clever, have done something smart and clever, like crypto, right? Or mortgage-backed securities, or, quant investing, or now, AI investing, right? There's real stuff going on by really clever people, but then always in their wake comes in the raccoons, the not too clever by half, just clever and thieving animals. So that's the analogy, right? So coyotes, like I say, I self-identify here as a coyote. There are a lot of coyotes in our business. It's a good thing, except you just have not to get shot by the animal control people. You have to understand the larger game that's being played. But then I've got no patience for the raccoons in our business, which are just the grifters and the shysters and the con men.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, I actually took a piece from part of your piece here. You said financial innovation, more than any other sort of innovation, attracts the raccoons. Con men and hucksters at best, outright thieves at worst. They infest financial innovation and they can't control themselves, so they always push it too far. They're never content with stealing a little or even a lot. No, raccoons want it all.
Raccoons
and it's interesting.
Want it all.
Like I can think, you have some better examples probably than me, but I can think of so many people like in this financial industry that would meet that definition. So what would be a good example you would give of this?
Well, and like I say, they always follow in the wake of financial innovation, right? That they're just drawn like a raccoon to garbage, to food that's left out there. That's what they do. I mean, there's some funny examples, right? I mean, there's the James Altuchers of the world. You can look him up. He's the guy with the crazy hair, and now he's running, some AI fund or something like that. And before that, it was crypto, of course. And before that, it was something else. And there are different gradations of who I consider to be raccoons, but one of the things I really believe is once a raccoon, always a raccoon. And the ones that really get me, that I don't mind calling out, are the ones who say one thing and act very differently. So one of my, we can talk about the current example that I think, and that's Michael Saylor, right? Who I think is just a raccoon from way back when. But most recently, it seems to be very similar in regards to another guy who I basically consider to be a raccoon, and that's Mark Benioff of Salesforce.com. I'm not saying these guys are crooks at all, right? I'm saying that I don't like them because they're going to say one thing, and then with the other, they're going to just try to take it all for themselves, everything they can. And that sort of mendacity of Raccoons really bugs me. I mean, look, Sam Bankman-Fried, I mean, classic Raccoon, right? One who was also an actual criminal, an actual con man and fraud. So I'm not, no legal issues here. I'm not saying that about, Benioff or Saylor. What I am saying is that they are demonstrably in it to get all they can in through whatever means necessary for themselves. So you guys, I'm actually interested. So Matt actually wrote an interesting note in his Cultish Creative Daily Note, which if you're not getting, you got to get Cultish Creative. You got to sign up for that. But Matt, you were talking about, I'll call it maybe a different type of raccoon that you're seeing in, frankly, our communities. They're not as big and famous as a Mark Benioff or as a Michael Saylor, but I'd love for you to talk about the raccoons you were writing about this week.
So what's funny is not even connecting it initially all the way back to this, because I felt like I was thinking of raccoons on a bigger level until I sent out this note and you pointed this connection out, and I went, oh my God, I'm writing about this. And sometimes you send an email and you get a bunch of feedback. And this was one of those emails that I sent. And then I started to hear a bunch of some pretty heartbreaking stories from other people about this. The quote from the piece that I said that kept coming back to me was, I said, I am, me, anti-get-rich-quick bros selling get-poor-slow techniques to got-rich-slow people with zero intent other than sapping susceptible wealth. What I was calling out is what I'm seeing is a expansion of raccoons who are looking at, in many cases, people like me. So I'm thinking like 40-ish year olds who basically either made career transitions or lifestyle changes of some way, shape, or form or another, far enough in our career to have a little money, to have stuff a little bit figured out. And then the pandemic really triggered part of our midlife with, there's got to be more than this.
Mm-hmm.
The innovation in this case of the pandemic caused a bunch of people to search for other stuff. And there are just so many of these like grifty writing, coaching, whatever other things
life
out there.
Coaches, yes. Yeah.
I'll help you transition your career. And to be clear, there are lots of good people doing this. But in our behind the scenes email conversation on this, I was like, it's like in the wake of the Paul Millards. For every Paul Millard, I feel like there's 5 other of these grifty people. And there's lots of
Paul being one of the non-grifty people.
Yeah, Paul is doing the right thing and is a wonderful human from our interactions. But there's these other people who just are showing up. So I heard stories from people who wrote in about, paid communities staked on authenticity. This one community in particular is very authenticity heavy. Like that's the prized possession of people who pay to belong to this. It's kind of like a networking group on steroids. Mm-hmm. And I heard a story from the founder about how somebody infiltrated the ranks, a true raccoon, and basically like wreaked havoc, like pretended to be one of these people, pretended like they were helping some people. But what they were really doing is targeting a community of people who were, again, not with a get rich quick scheme. They didn't come in there with the next hot 5 AI stocks, James Altucher style. They came in there playing like they're right on their side and then figured out how to take some money, take some other stuff, and then poof, and just gone with the money.
The amazing thing to me about raccoons, Matt, is that they'll make their score in whatever issue of the day is. To your point right now, it's about life coaching, authentic connections, networking, and the like. Make a score by preying on trust, fade back into the woods, and then the next time there's some available, garbage can, right? Some available topic, they'll come right back in. And that's, we can get into like a Michael Saylor, for example, who I guess without admitting, what is the phrase, without admitting or denying guilt, right? You make restitution and you move on to civil charges. And this was around because MicroStrategy arguably triggered the dot-com collapse in March of 2000 with their accounting fraud. And that's the right word to use here. And my view is once a raccoon, always a raccoon. You just find a new way to express your inner raccoonness. But to your point, man, that's maybe the most galling thing about it, because I know lots of coyotes, smart people, on the make, like any good, financial participant, like I am, right? Trying to make a buck, but doing it the right way, doing it by their wits and coming up with some new idea and being clever and the like. And then they get on the wrong side of what I like to call the meta game, and they're taken out in the street and shot. The example I gave in Too Clever by Half was Bear Stearns, right? That whole firm, everybody who's worked there was taken out of the street and shot in the head by the animal control guys of financial markets. And that was, I understand why it happened, because they wanted to make an example of Bear Stearns, not because they were raccoons, not because they were con men, but because they were too clever by half, right? They cut corners and they were at that epicenter. And so they needed to take them out of the street and shot to show the rest of the world, hey, it's all safe. Of course, it wasn't safe, but that's why they executed Bear Stearns. I get it. But what really bugs me is that so many others who were con men around mortgage-backed securities, around everything that led up to the great financial crisis, they're doing just fine. Thank you very much. They survive that, and then they move on to do something, their next asset management or investment related grift. And that to me is what bugs me about Michael Saylor. That's what's always bugged me about Mark Benioff. The thing that bugs me about Benioff, the thing that is bugging me now about Saylor and I want to write about, is that for a period of 6 years with Mark Benioff, 2010, 2016, something like that, every day he sold stock. And by every day he sold stock, right? I'm not saying that, he would occasionally sell some of his own stock. I mean, every day the market was open, he was selling 10,000 to 15,000 shares of CRM stock. And then he'd sell it all, and then the board would just reload him with more stock, right? So it's not like, oh, he's the founder, he can do whatever he wants to. No, this was all the plan. He's just going to sell it as soon as he gets it. And then when he's done, the board reloads him with more. And that's what Saylor's been doing with MicroStrategy stock as well. So it's not just that he's doing converts and the like of his shell of a software company to buy Bitcoin, but he's also now selling his own stock for his own benefit. Every day the market is open, he's out there selling. And it's that sort of using the system that rises to raccoon level in my book. So it's fascinating, right? There's the big public raccoons like a Saylor or Benioff. And then it's the raccoons on the personal level, like Matt's talking about, where I think the damage is actually so much more direct and so much more human. And it just pervades our business. It absolutely just is everywhere.
Saylor's a crazy example to me because, he's got basically what I think is pretty much a shitty business in MicroStrategy. He decides he's going to buy all this Bitcoin, and then he decides he's going to buy all this Bitcoin. He props up the stock, and then he's basically selling it out the back door like the whole time, making money for himself. And I guess technically he's not selling the Bitcoin. He's selling the MicroStrategy stock. So he could, he could say he's holding on to the Bitcoin. It's like that to me seems like a pretty egregious example of the whole thing.
It does, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It does, doesn't it? But there's so many stories like that, Jack. So many stories like that in our business, and it's just it's it makes me angry. It makes me sad. A lot of times I don't know what to do about it, and there's nothing to do about it because most of these cases of raccoonery that we're talking about are not criminal, right? It's not an SBF situation, but it's why the most important element of our business is trust and reputation. And that was, I've learned a couple of really big lessons in my career. And one of the first was, don't ever do something to damage your reputation, to have any risk of it. Because this is a wonderful business we're in, both in terms of the intrinsic rewards or the extrinsic rewards, but the intrinsic rewards too. We're solving puzzles, we're meeting new people, we're doing fun things, right? It's a great career. And, it's the old story, right? If you break a teacup, drop it on the ground, you break it, you can glue it back together. You really can. But what you have is still a broken teacup. You can't ever really glue it back together. And that's exactly the same thing with your reputation in a trust-heavy business like we're in. And yet there are a lot of people who play on their reputations all the time and don't care about the teacup being broken.
Yeah, it just doesn't stop them. One of the places you see this a lot, we were talking before we recorded, is like in the investment newsletter industry. It's a very common thing. Like as a registered investment advisor, you have a bunch of rules you have to follow, but the investment newsletter industry is basically the Wild West. I mean, the effective only rule is you can't outright lie. And so these guys, like, a lot of these factories that create all these newsletters, like we've had some access to some of their copywriters over the years who we've talked to, and like, they've figured out how to go right to that line, like to the line of like, they're not 100% guaranteeing you that 1,000% return. There's like one word in the sentence that makes it there a slight bit of doubt that you're not going to get that 1,000% return that they're promising. And they figured out a way to do it. And like, that stuff makes me so mad because people do, as much as you think they wouldn't, like in the modern world, people still fall prey to that stuff. They still subscribe to these newsletters. They still follow their recommendations. And like, to me, like for what I see on a day-to-day basis, those are like the ultimate raccoons because they're just taking advantage of people for their own profit.
Yeah. Ultimate raccoon is a hard word, right? And
I guess, yeah.
I do want to come back to the animal control people, right? The regulators in all of this, because what you mentioned just in that statement, Jack, which is so right, and it's so again troubling to me, right? Is that actually I think all three of us are members of are registered investment advisors. And depending on who our regulatory group is, let's call it the SEC for all of us. Maybe it's, I'm not sure, but we'll call it the SEC. I mean, you'll get an SEC regulator come in on something you write, and if you don't footnote your graph of the S&P 500 by saying, footnote, the S&P 500 is not an investable index, you'll get fined for something like that, right? So you're absolutely right, Jack. It is a combination of Wild West, particularly like in crypto world, where it's a commodity if it's anything. And so it's a totally different regulatory environment than around our business. And if there's any kind of regulatory impact at all, it's a much lighter side. So you've got a Wild West out there with the craziest, most ridiculous claims. And then on our side of the fence, it's, well, you can't possibly say that, use that graph of the S&P 500 without warning your audience that it's not an investable index. It's the hyper regulatory aspects on our side of the fence in contrast to the Wild West zero regulatory aspect on the other side of the fence. That is part of my frustration with the whole environment here.
And where it's even crazier is on the ETF side. Like we ran an ETF for a little bit. Like the rules ETFs have to follow is ridiculous. Like, I mean, you basically can't do anything. Like everything has to be pre-approved. You can't say the ticker. You can't say anything. You can't say factual information. You can't say anything. Like that's a really, really tough space to operate. Like they've gone, I think, way too far in that space.
Right. Fact is not a defense, right? Truth is not the defense. And it's a full employment act for compliance officers and compliance departments and the like. It's crazy. Like I say, if you haven't experienced it, I know we're talking on this show to people who haven't lived in a regulatory environment like that. You think, oh, how bad can it be? It's crazy bad or crazy difficult, crazy limiting, insanely limiting. While at the same time, just on the other side of the street, you've got just outright con men at work. So it's a frustrating world.
Well, let's jump right into the middle of frustration because Twitter never fails to deliver us what was the one we saw the update, the one the other week, Jack? It was like a certified options trading. Do you remember what
yes,
the completely
that is a good example
title?
of the Raccoons. Like it was like, there's this paid tweet that's been going around that I've seen a lot. It's like something like, I'm a certified options and stock specialist. And like, here are my options ideas to make you 1,000% or something. And my first question is, what the hell is a certified options and stock specialist? Does that exist, Ben? Are you aware of that?
Yeah.
Like, is that, did they pass the Series 7 or something? And that's what they're calling a certified options and stock specialist? I'm
the
not
Series
really sure,
7 up. They passed the Series 7
up. That's right. The Series 7 up. Yeah.
Before the tweet of the week, I have to tell this story. So an uncle of mine is on an airplane in like the probably mid 80s, and he sits down. He gets bumped up to like first class, and he's next to this guy who sits down next to him, and this guy is all smiling and happy and orders champagne for both of them, like the neighbor in the aisle or whatever. And he's like, you must be having a good day. He's like, I'm having a good day. I got bumped up to first class. This guy's like, I'm having a amazing day. The best day ever. He's like, well, what happened to you? Because I just got bumped up. And the guy's like, I just won the biggest contract. I beat this company out in this negotiation. I'm going home. They're going to celebrate everything that I just did. My uncle's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what was this thing? And he's like, I beat out two dog food companies and something else for this beef contract. And it's going to be huge for profits. Oh, that's really interesting. Who do you work for? Oh, I work for, it was like McDonald's. And my uncle was like, and I sat there looking at him with the champagne in my hand going, you won, but I don't think I won.
I don't think I won at all.
I think about that story a lot.
That's a good story. That's a good one.
That's a good one. Tweet of the week, extra zeitgeisty. Jack, tell us, educate us something on inflation here, will you?
Yeah, so Ben, we talked about the map versus the territory with inflation in a previous episode. And, I think like as much as I understood what you're saying there, I think I finally found the perfect map for inflation. And that map is CPI X energy, food, shelter, auto insurance, and auto repair. Because if I want to look at that number, inflation is very under control and it's probably over. So I don't know, I don't have to really read the tweet because that is what the tweet was, Ben. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's everywhere, right? So if you're watching the show, you might be, right? You're following financial Twitter. And, there's the big day, is inflation going away? Is it coming back? I'm firmly in the inflation never really left that's embedded and is here. And so the response is, well, inflation is only where it is because as high as it's been the last few months because of the way that shelter, rent and housing prices are compiled. And I'm like, well, no kidding, right? No kidding. The thing about our inflation indices is, friends, it's always something. It's always something, right? That. It's not like we're saying, oh, it's a 4% inflation rate. It doesn't mean that everything goes up 1/12 of 4%, per month in some sort of lockstep, right? This is not the way the world works. The way that the world and inflation works, I like to think of it as like you're trying to hold a beach ball underwater in the pool. It's always going to pop up somewhere, right? It's really hard to keep that beach ball underneath the water. It's just rolls out, is going to pop up somewhere else. So this is the point about inflation and the problem with taking out things that you think are anomalies, which has a long tradition. It goes back to, inflation, monitoring and fighting, in the 1970s, where the decision was made was, well, there's something going on in the Middle East. We should take oil out of the pricing. It's a temporary thing. Or, that the oil price is fed through into plastics. So we should take plastic stuff out of the calculation now. Oh, but wait, that fed into fertilizer, which fed into food. So we need to take food out of all this, out of the calculations. It's such a bad way and I get it. You wanna focus on the stuff that's really foundational and fundamental, that doesn't go way up and way down from month to month. I agree, because monetary policy, setting interest rates, is a very blunt tool. When you change an interest rate, the impact it has in the real economy takes months and months and months. So you can't be just whipping from stem to stern, from pillar to post on a month-to-month basis. You need to have something that smooths things out. I get that. And that really is important for policy. But the way to get that is not by, let's pick and choose things that aren't going up. Right? And so this was just the kind of, it was so crazy. This person did, well, let's do core CPI, which is already taking out energy and food cost. Let's now take out from core CPI shelter, auto insurance, and auto repair.
That's a huge percentage, right? If you add all that stuff up, that's a huge percentage of CPI.
Oh, it's way more than half, right? I think shelter's like a third.
I was thinking about like my everyday life. If I look at the money I spend, like shelter, energy, food, I mean, that's a huge amount of what you spend.
Well, that's the thing, Jack. So the whole idea here is we want to understand the territory. We want to understand, what is the cost of living? How much does it cost to live? And we keep on abstracting and creating ever more separated from the territory maps. And there's always a good reason for it, but it only serves to separate you farther and farther from the actual real world cost of living. Anyway, there's so much we can go in on this. The whole notion of how we, account for inflation and shelter, it's called owner's equivalent rent. All that. I agree. It's all broken and weird and an abstraction that makes not a lot of sense. But the answer to that is not to say, well, let's just ignore shelter, right? Or let's pick the measurement of shelter that right now would give us the most, the answer that we agree with, the answer that we want.
Is there a coyote angle to some of this? Like, so it's, as people try to figure out, so when I put my financial planner hat on, one of the things that when we talk about inflation and we're doing a financial plan for somebody, one thing we always remind them is like real inflation, you can ignore or pay attention to whatever stats on the TV or the websites or whatever you want. The reality is we all experience it differently, because my house or my rent or my repair costs or my next car or whatever, it's so much of that is going to be idiosyncratic to where you are in the world, in the country, and a phase of life. Big difference in healthcare costs between like the 25-year-old, the 45-year-old, and the 75-year-old.
Yep.
So inside this, when I see people manipulating this, is this kind of like, some of it's not necessarily harmful, some of it is, but some of it's just, is this coyote behavior that we're seeing with all these 1,000,001 inflation statistics?
Yeah. I mean, what you're trying to do is you're trying to solve a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, the reason we do this weird thing called owner equivalent rent is we're if you were just kind of like to look at, the price of your house, well, that's an asset, right? So that's not really the cost of living. But, then do we want to put in, what's your mortgage payments? I kind of like that, frankly, because that's kind of what we experience. And so when interest rates go up, as they've gone up, man, I've got an adjustable rate mortgage. I do. And my cost of living sure going up. My cost of living is going up a lot as interest rates go up. But that doesn't get captured in any of these measurements. What they're trying to capture is, okay, for that house, what would be if it were rented to you, what rent would you be paying for that? Right? That's this notion of owner's equivalent rent. And I get it, right? They're trying to say, well, how can we try to get a common measurement between apartment rents and houses? Oh, well, let's treat the house as if it were rented to the person. It's a clever way. It's a clever coyote way to try to solve a problem and get a measurement. A measurement being the map, a measurement not being the territory. So your point, Matt, is exactly right. For a family, for a client, for a financial advisor, for an endowment, I'll say this, for anyone with money, right? The only question you have to answer for your investment strategy, right, is, am I in an inflationary environment or am I not? That's it. That's it. You don't have to get that question exactly right. You don't have to know the difference between, it's a 3% inflation rate or 4% inflation rate, or these are all differences that we've turned into some big thing that matters. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. What matters is, am I in an inflationary world or a non-inflationary world? I got to get that basic question basically right in order to preserve wealth for our family and children and grandchildren, all like that. That's it.
Speaking of questions, Jack, you got a dumb one, and it's not as dumb as inflation, but maybe.
Well, this goes back to like one of the biggest things I've learned from Ben over the years. There's that Ben Graham quote, that in the long run, the market's a weighing machine, but in the short term run, it's a voting machine. And I remember like a podcast you and Rusty did like a long, long time ago.
He never said that.
Yeah. First of all, he never said that. Correct.
Right.
But second of all, even if he did say it, you guys were saying like, well, that's not right. Like the reality is it's a voting machine all the way down.
All the way down.
Like sometimes the people voting might care about the fundamentals, but the reality is it's always voting.
But before you add, so go ahead and answer your dumb question. I want to come back to this about whether Ben Graham ever wrote that. So
let's do that first, and then I'll do my dumb question.
So Ben Graham never wrote that. He never wrote, in the short run, it's a voting machine. In the long run, it's a weighing machine. What happened was Warren Buffett said that he wrote it. And so now we all know that Benjamin Graham wrote that. In fact, Benjamin Graham never wrote that. It's just one of these fascinating stories. It's like, who invented the game of baseball? Right? Jack, who would you say, who invented the game of baseball?
I actually don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Matt?
I don't know.
Sorry. Well, if you go to a baseball bar, you ask them, they'll say Abner Doubleday. Everyone will say Abner. You've heard the name Abner. They'll say,
Heard the name. Yeah.
Abner Doubleday. He invented the game. No, he didn't invent the game of baseball. There's so many things that things we know are true. This old Mark Twain line is, it's not, the things you don't know that get you in trouble. It's the things, you think you know or you don't know, right? You don't really know. They'll get you in trouble. There's so many things like this, right? Now, so Benjamin Graham never wrote at least that the market is a weighing machine in the long run.
That's right. And, it's funny you brought up Mark Twain too, because what you said actually is a Mark Twain quote, but he's probably the person who gets most attributed with quotes that are not his. Like everybody is throwing these Mark Twain quotes like left and right. And like the vast majority of them were never said by Mark Twain.
Correct. Yeah.
So anyway, but back to my question. Like those of us that do invest in the market using fundamentals have definitely seen a changing world in the past decade, or maybe even longer than that, and there's a lot of people explanations to that. I mean, you've made some great explanations around narrative. I mean, we have Mike Green's work around the influence of passive investing on this. So it just seems like there's a lot of stuff going on here where either fundamental investors need to lengthen their timeframes, or the market just is not going to care, even over those longer timeframes, about fundamentals. They seem to matter less. And I don't know if you saw this, but there was a recent David Einhorn podcast around this, where he basically said, he's sort of giving up on the idea that he's going to get paid by the market, so that the multiple on his small cap value stock is going to go up. He's giving up on that, and he's only investing in stocks where the capital is going to be returned directly to him through buybacks and things like that, where he sees opportunities where it doesn't really matter what the market does. So I guess that's a long-winded way of just asking, I mean, what are your thoughts on this idea that, fundamentals don't matter in investing anymore, or that they're not going to matter going forward?
I don't think fundamentals will ever matter again for alpha, for outperformance. Right. I don't think it's possible for you, Jack, or me, or for Matt to know the fundamentals of a company better than other investors to a degree that allows you to make money on that knowledge. I don't think that's possible. I say that's not possible because it's no longer legal. So I think that what I would describe as fundamental investing used to have alpha associated with it, because alpha comes from private information. Period, full stop. Alpha comes from private information. If everybody knows something, it definitionally cannot provide alpha. So with the passage of Reg FD, which now prevents the managers of public corporations from sharing information with one investor, but not all investors, material information. With the passage of Reg FD, I don't think that fundamental alpha-oriented investing can work. What you're left with in the absence of Reg FD, or in the presence of Reg FD, is your opinion based on publicly available information. And I don't think there's any replicable edge in that. I think there are sources of alpha, and I think that one can derive private information from public sources. But I believe strongly that for quote unquote fundamental investing, value investing, there is not enough private information that can be legally gained from public sources to allow any sort of replicable edge. So yeah, I think it's dead, Matt and Jack, unless there's a change in the regulatory environment, which could happen, right? I mean, it's still legal to have private information in private equity. It is still legal to have inside information in commodities. You know, in light of our discussion earlier about what you can say and what you can't say. Yeah, that which always surprised me that, yeah, you know, insider information is perfectly legal in commodity world. So that's my answer to your question, Jack. It's an unpopular answer, I know, because we want to believe that if we're just, by golly, if we're just smart enough and we work hard enough, we can have an edge based on our interpretation of publicly available information. And I don't think that's true.
What do you think about Einhorn's idea that, like, even if, let's say, I get the fundamentals right and I somehow outsmart the market, like in these small cap stocks, because everybody's buying the index fund, everybody's putting money in the bigger companies, no one's really paying attention. So it doesn't even matter if I get the fundamentals right. Like my multiple expansion I'm expecting to get, where the PE goes from 10 to 15, I'm not going to get it because no one's paying any attention. Like, do you think there's something to that?
Oh, there's always been something to that. That's always why, fundamental investors have always been attracted to small caps and undercovered stocks, because that's where, even with public information, you can have an edge because no one else is looking at it. No one else is pouring through the 10Ks and Qs like you are on this little company. No one else is doing the legwork, to see channel checks and stuff like that for this small little company. And so it's always so appealing to say, oh, that's where I can have my informational edge with legal public information, with small cap and underfollowed stocks. The trick to that, yeah, sure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, the fascinating part about this is the missionary aspect, to use the term, of like telling everybody, hey, I have this information that's not common knowledge. Then it gets accepted as common knowledge and it pumps up your stock price. Not necessarily in a nefarious way, because like you were right, perhaps in the research in this scenario, which that's the dream. That also only ever works up to a certain level.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the point, Jack, that Einhorn is making, and he's exactly right. So step one is get that edge, an informational edge. Step two, take the position. Step three, and this is the trickiest part today, is the rest of the world has to recognize that you're right. The rest of the world has to recognize that you're right. Because if the rest of the world doesn't recognize it, then you'll never get paid. You'll never get paid. And there was a time, look, there was a time when that sort of informational edge, you would get paid for it. There were enough other investors who cared, because markets happen on the margins. Markets happen in the change in the delta. So there were enough active investors who, when that company reported the blowout earnings that you knew were coming, because you had done the legwork and done all the effort, you'd get paid for it. And today, Einhorn's exactly right. You can be right and nobody gives a damn. And you don't get paid. That's the most frustrating thing for coyotes like Einhorn, like me, like you, smart guys who work really hard and have a good insight, and you're right, and you still don't get paid. Man, that's the worst. That is the worst, but that is exactly what this investment world has been like for the last 15 years.
Yeah, you don't see much of anything that would change that going in the future.
No, and like I say, it started to change, before the great financial crisis. It really started to change in 06 or 07 when they changed Reg FD, because the oldest, David Lynch, right? Not David Lynch.
Peter Lynch.
Peter Lynch. Yeah, David Lynch. Totally different Lynch. Right?
What works on a very different street.
Yes, exactly. right. That would be Peter Lynch, Magellan Fund, right? So, you can know your company. you can really know your company. And so you want to buy a company that you use their products and you really understand, you know, you know, the way that Magellan, the way all large investors worked is pre-Reg FD, you'd have your call with the CEO and the CFO, and you're not asking them what their earnings number is. What you're asking them is, are we okay? Are we okay? Is it safe? Are we good here? Are we good? And they would tell you, because they know that if they tell you, oh yeah, we're good, and they're not, then you're going to move on. You're going to move your money. You're going to invest somewhere else. If you tell them, I don't know, they'll say, okay, we're good. Okay, I get it. And they'll hold back. They'll trim a little bit. And then afterwards, they'll have another call, say, we're good. Say, yeah, I think we're good now. And they'll come back on in. My friends, that is how the investment world in Peter Lynch's day for active mutual funds and active investment funds, that's how it worked. Because you could have private conversations, not to get the earnings number, right? You're not asking them to tell you material non-public information. You're just having a conversation, say, are we good? And they'd say yes. Or they'd go, I don't know, we're having some little issues with X, Y, and Z. And you go, all right, that's fine. You weren't going to then turn around and short the stock, right? It's just you wouldn't be adding. And then when it is good, you're going to add. That whole world changed, and the availability of private information for large asset managers disappeared. And that's my view, is why old school fundamental investing, know your company, doesn't work anymore.
Well, Matt, shifting from the investing world here to the cultish world, we've got your cultish corner. What do you got this week?
I have to say this first, because this is just on my mind. It's we're going to talk about Mitch Hedberg in a second here, and I know as a Pinky in the Brain guy, Ben, I'm sure you're a Mitch Hedberg.
Absolutely, for sure.
He has. I was thinking about this with the material private information thing. He has that joke that's like, they tell you that Sprite is just lemon and lime, but they're lying. There's really more to it than that. Like, I tried it at home. Yeah, it's going to take more than lemon and lime to make that secret recipe. And that is active investing in a nutshell. So this will be, this will be out by the time that this post is live. But there's this idea, and I think it applies to raccoons and coyotes and candidly just how to survive the inevitable mishaps we have in communication, especially within small groups. At the end of the day, just like inflation is personal, communication is personal too. We can get upset and should get upset about the grifty behaviors at the largest scales. We have to call that stuff out, but we got to figure out how to get right at home first. Mm-hmm. Without a Mitch impression, this particular thing, and hat tip to Mike Birbiglia for sending me extra down the rabbit hole on this several years ago, but this has been in my head forever. And I wrote a letter to my dad. I wrote, I really enjoyed being here, but I accidentally wrote rarely instead of really, but I still wanted to use it. So I crossed it out and wrote, I rarely drive steamboats, Dad. There's a lot of shit you don't know about me. Quit trying to act like I'm a steamboat operator. This letter took a really harsh turn right away. Hello, Dad. Now I'm going to break this apart. And I think the common metaphor here is it's the iceberg thing. You see the tip of the iceberg, you don't see the thing underneath. And that's like formula number one for learning about empathy and empathetic communication. It's a good rule for people, that you give them the grace of assuming you're only ever seeing what's above the surface, what's presenting, and there's a world of things going on underneath. But there's this big difference between people who are accidentally realizing they're presenting themselves as steamboat operators, who want to fix the confusion, who are, genuinely trying to connect, and those who are genuinely lying about being steamboat operators. that want to milk the confusion for profit or gain or financial status or otherwise. So a question for each of you, like, how do you tell? How do you tell who the steamboat operators are genuinely and the ones who are making a mistake?
Oh gosh, I'll go first. And this is such a much bigger conversation, right? But it's language and the meaning of language. Gosh, I could talk for a long time about this, but I won't. But you know how I love to talk about this stuff. But it depends. You have to live with someone, right? It is time and convention, and those are the only ways of telling the difference. I wish there was an easy way. I wish there were a definitional way. I wish there was a litmus test that you could give to tell the difference. And there is not, because this question is at the core of how we humans trust each other and communicate with each other. And there is no substitute for time and experience with that person. It's the only way to tell. The only way to tell.
And this is such a bigger problem, like in the social media driven world, because that time doesn't happen a lot of the time. Like going back to what we were talking about in the first segment, I mean, a lot of these people with these self-help things and everything, I mean, you're seeing their tweet, their 14 tweet thread or whatever about how they can help you, but you have no idea. Like you have no idea whether they can be trusted or not.
It sounds right?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, oh, they've got lots of charts and footnotes. Oh, they've got footnotes. And I'm being facetious, but I'm not being facetious. I mean, this is the Balaji method. This is, well, you believe in, evidence-based, thinking, don't you? And it's just, anyway. Yes.
It's so interesting. And this goes back to the Berbiglia thing. And this is a conversation in my house. It's a conversation with my wife. Like I know you two can relate to this too. Or you can at least relate to it knowing me. It's get delusionally excited about things. And it's like you're rattling off all these things. And sometimes the people even closest to us are like, wait, what, where? Like, where's this going? What's going? And Berbiglia shared that he says this to his wife, or they say this back and forth, him a comedian, she a poet. And here I am at home, just a meanly financial advisor, my wife the nurse. But it's like, hey, wait, quit trying to act like I'm a steamboat operator. Like, that's the signal. That's the line where it's like, okay, this is misunderstood. I am clearly not a steamboat operator. You know this about me. And we need to connect. We need to bring it back to the all-important, Mitch Hedberg, the ultimate fortune cookie of comedians, where it's a crappy cookie on the outside, but it's the most deep and brilliant insight on the inside. You got to bring it back to hello, dad. That's the timepiece. That's the, you know me, you get me, you understand me. And we only build that through those repeat communications.
Yeah. I'll just add one thing, Matt.
Please.
The other thing is, we coyotes, we like to pretend we're steamboat operators.
Oh my God, we love it. We love to go, oh, I messed up. I said rarely instead of really. I got this. I have a wonderful solution for this.
Exactly.
Coyote 101. Guys, I got a summary for us. Plenty of notes here today. So, top of the episode, I wrote down one of my favorite Rory Sutherlandisms. A flower is a weed with a marketing budget, and we're adding to it now, a raccoon is a thief with a cute mask and opposable thumbs. Innovation attracts raccoons. That's, if nothing else, the theme of this whole episode. Innovation attracts raccoons. You can never forget this because they're going to get all they can for them, and they're going to kill something or they're going to leave when they're done. So you just have to expect that raccoons are going to show up. You got to protect your people from them. You got to call animal control when you need to, but beyond the official animal control, you got to figure out ways to lock that lid. We talked about how there are, I wrote down, there are more words than letters in the alphabet. In the same way, there are more inflation indicators than there are prices of things. Aggregation is a necessity, but beware that the picking and choosing of all the things that you're adjusting, the picks and the chooses don't really matter so much as how you understand it to yourself. And if the things are going up, Ben, you made this point very beautifully. If the things are going up, that's what you have to know. If the things are going down, that's what you have to know. That's what you set strategy by, and that's what you got to do on the personal level. We talked about how Ben Graham never said in the short run, markets are a voting machine. The long term, they're a weighing machine. But Buffett certainly did. And he said it for a good story, not in a nefarious way. And when we connected it back, Jack, to your point about will fundamentals ever matter? Well, they won't matter for alpha, not like they did for Buffett when he was telling that story. And again, innovation attracts raccoons. So what's going to show up in the wake of that not existing anymore is other ways to reconceive that alpha. And last but not least, say it for the millionth time, innovation attracts raccoons. So just like good restaurants have tasty, by raccoon standards, trash, raccoons look cute, but they don't stop helping to themselves until they exhaust, kill, or get full, bored, and leave. And we just have to expect them. We have to lock the lid. We have to take care of our people. And if we're unsure if the raccoons are amongst us and not the coyotes, and this is really important from what we tied up with the end, we got to watch their behaviors. And I think more than anything in the Mitch Hedberg tradition, this is where you got to look for the people who, even after they mess something up or it doesn't work out perfectly, they stop. They try to say, I'm not a steamboat operator after all, perhaps. And they say hello again to start over, because that's truly the most important thing, that we remember we can start over and we'll allow the people we care about to start over with us. Thanks so much for joining me, guys.
Thank you, Matt. That was great.
That was awesome.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you're watching breaking news so more people can find our show. If you know another clear-eyed and full-hearted individual, why not share this episode with them too? Like we said at the top, the media is making us tick, and it's our job to talk. Follow the headlines at fiatnews.com. Follow Ben at epsilontheory.com and at Epsilon Theory on Twitter. Follow Jack at validiacapital.com and at Practical Quant on Twitter. Follow Matt at sunpointinvestments.com, cultishcreative.com, and at Cultish Creative on Twitter.